I saw her hiding behind the kitchen island, clutching a plate that everyone else had ignored. Vincent whispered to himself as he stepped into the dimly lit mansion, the faint hum of the air conditioning mixing with the soft creak of the hardwood floors under his polished shoes, his eyes immediately drawn to the small figure of Sophie, the maid's daughter, who froze mid-bite, her eyes wide and startled as if she had been caught in a secret that should never have been discovered. The moonlight, spilling through the tall windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, the remnants of the evening's feast scattered across the counters. Vincent's gaze softened as he noticed how carefully she handled the leftover food, folding napkins and arranging the dishes with a meticulous care that spoke volumes about her respect for what little she had. He stepped closer, making sure his footsteps were measured so as not to startle her further. "It is all right," he said calmly, his voice a low rumble that carried authority yet warmth. "You do not need to hide." And for the first time, Sophie let her shoulders relax slightly, her hands still trembling as she set the plate down. Vincent took a slow breath, absorbing the scene before him. The quiet bravery of this young woman, the determination in her eyes that mirrored a resilience he had rarely seen. He thought about the life she led, the sacrifices made silently by both her and her mother. The thought of her enduring hardships, without complaint, made a pang of empathy rise within him. He studied the curve of her jaw, the subtle tension in her brow, the way her hair fell slightly across her face, the dim lighting adding an almost cinematic quality to the moment. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze, ensuring she understood he meant no harm, only understanding and acknowledgement. "I saw you," he continued, "and I want you to know that your efforts are not invisible." And a small, almost imperceptible smile flickered across Sophie's lips. Vincent remained there for a few more moments, letting the silence speak as much as any words could. The mansion felt larger than ever, yet this moment created a private bubble, a space of recognition and subtle connection. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling over him, knowing that this encounter was more than a mere observation. It was a choice point, an opportunity to alter the course of her path. He extended a hand gently, not demanding, but offering a bridge of trust, and Sophie hesitated, then took it, a delicate gesture that felt monumental. Vincent straightened, a renewed sense of purpose filling him, the night air outside whispering through open windows, carrying the faint scent of flowers and the distant city lights. He realized this single act of noticing, of acknowledging, could ripple through the lives of those in the house in ways far beyond the simple act of sharing a meal. He stepped back, letting Sophie gather herself, the unspoken understanding between them hanging like a delicate thread in the air. And as he watched her leave the kitchen with the plate now empty, a small but significant part of him knew that the trajectory of her life had quietly shifted from that very moment. The soft click of the door marking the end of one chapter and the tentative beginning of another, and Vincent, standing alone, felt a rare warmth of satisfaction in witnessing an act of unnoticed courage unfold before him in the stillness of the night. Vincent watched silently as Sophie carried the empty plate back to the small kitchenette, her movements careful and deliberate, the soft hum of the refrigerator blending with the distant city sounds filtering through the tall windows. He followed her at a measured pace, not to intrude, but to offer reassurance. "You do not have to worry about doing this in secret," he said gently, his voice low yet steady. Carrying an air of calm authority, Sophie glanced up, her eyes meeting his, a flicker of surprise crossing her face as she registered his presence and the sincerity in his tone. The subtle tension in her shoulders eased slightly as she set the plate down on the counter. Vincent observed the details, the slight tilt of her head, the way her fingers lingered on the edges of the plate, the delicate rhythm of her breathing, and understood the weight of responsibility she had carried without recognition. He spoke again. "I noticed, and I appreciate the care you show even in small things." And she nodded, a small smile forming, a quiet acknowledgement of being seen. Vincent stepped closer, his gaze softening, allowing a moment of connection that spoke louder than any words, the warm glow of the overhead lights casting gentle shadows that highlighted the contours of her face. He thought about the unspoken challenges in her daily life, the resilience required to navigate her circumstances, and felt a profound respect for her courage. He offered a hand, not commanding, but but inviting, a gesture of trust and understanding. And Sophie hesitated briefly before placing her hand in his. A simple action that carried a profound significance. The room seemed to pause around them, the quiet intimacy of recognition filling the space. Vincent released her hand after a moment, giving her room to compose herself, his eyes lingering with a promise of support and awareness. He turned his attention to the scattered remnants of the kitchen, considering the effort required to maintain order and dignity in a place not always accommodating. Sophie straightened, her steps becoming more confident as she moved to tidy the counters. Vincent observed with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the simple act of noticing and acknowledging her efforts had already begun to ease the burden she carried. The soft clinking of dishes as she worked, the gentle sweep of her hand over the countertop, the light catching in her hair as she moved through the kitchen. All these details painted a vivid picture of resilience and humility. Vincent felt a quiet sense of fulfillment in witnessing her perseverance. The night outside casting a serene calm over the mansion, and as he watched her finish, he realized that this small moment of understanding, trust, and silent encouragement had created a subtle but meaningful shift, a beginning that could influence not only her day but the trajectory of her confidence and sense of self-worth. He quietly stepped back, allowing her space, yet remaining present as a silent witness to her effort, the soft light and shadows dancing in the room framing a tableau of understated strength and the delicate beginnings of mutual respect and awareness that could unfold into deeper understanding over time. As the first light of dawn filtered through the tall windows, Vincent remained quietly seated, observing Sophie as she moved with measured grace, her small gestures conveying a resilience born of necessity rather than performance. "You managed everything so well yesterday," he said softly, his voice carrying an almost imperceptible warmth that made her pause mid-step, her eyes flicking toward him with a mix of curiosity and cautious appreciation, the subtle tension of responsibility in her posture giving way to a tentative relaxation. Vincent continued, "Even in the smallest details, your care did not go unnoticed," and she nodded, her lips curving slightly in acknowledgement. The kitchen around them quiet except for the soft hum of appliances and the distant city sounds drifting through the open window. He studied her attentively, noticing the delicate movements of her hands as she arranged the items on the counter, the faint furrow in her brow that hinted at her meticulous thought process, the careful way she adjusted a dish as though it required exact positioning to maintain balance. "I know these moments might seem insignificant, yet they reveal much about your character," Vincent said, his tone steady and encouraging. Sophie glanced up, meeting his eyes, a subtle understanding passing between them. He offered a gentle nod, an unspoken signal of recognition and respect for the effort she poured into everyday tasks. The room seemed to breathe with a calm sense of intimacy as he remained present, silently witnessing her diligence and composure. Sophie adjusted a chair with a practiced hand, placing it precisely against the table before moving to organize a stack of dishes. The natural light highlighted the careful alignment of objects, the small, deliberate actions painting a vivid image of her disciplined routine. Vincent felt a quiet admiration for the way she balanced her responsibilities with grace and attentiveness. He leaned back slightly, allowing space while maintaining a supportive presence, the exchange between them, defined not by words alone, but by a mutual acknowledgement of effort and care. "Every gesture matters," he said quietly, and Sophie absorbed the sentiment, her movements becoming more assured, a lightness in her step reflecting the subtle but profound validation he provided. The kitchen, filled with soft morning light, became a stage for this quiet connection, where patience, observation, and appreciation intertwined. Vincent observed the details, the way Sophie's eyes focused on each task, the gentle rhythm of her movements, the way her hair caught the light as she reached for a utensil, and understood that these simple, unnoticed actions revealed a depth of character and resilience. He offered a small smile, a recognition of her unseen labor, and Sophie returned it with a tentative, grateful expression, the silent affirmation strengthening a bond rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and the acknowledgement of quiet courage. And as the morning progressed, both remained aware of this new layer of connection, a shared recognition of perseverance, dignity, and attentiveness that subtly reshaped the dynamic between them, allowing space for trust and appreciation to grow within the tranquil, sunlit room. Later that afternoon, the mansion settled into its usual rhythm, quiet footsteps in long hallways, distant conversations behind closed doors, sunlight stretching across polished floors, and I found myself thinking about Sophie far more than I expected, not because she had asked for attention, but because she never did, and somehow that made her impossible to ignore. I was walking through the service corridor near the staff entrance when I noticed a backpack resting against the wall beside a chair, worn at the edges, carefully maintained despite years of use. And as I passed, a small notebook slipped from an unzipped pocket and landed softly on the floor. I bent down automatically, intending only to place it back where it belonged. But the notebook fell open in my hands, revealing page after page covered in neat handwriting, detailed schedules, calculations, goals, and notes written with extraordinary care. And before I realized it, I was standing there reading. There were no complaints inside those pages, no bitterness, no requests for sympathy, only plans, ambitions, and relentless determination. Every page revealed another piece of a life nobody in this house seemed to notice. Tuition estimates, scholarship deadlines, application requirements, study schedules, book lists, personal goals organized by month and year. Beside each expense was a handwritten calculation showing how many extra shifts she would need to work, how many dollars she hoped to save, how much she could contribute without creating additional pressure for her mother. I slowly turned another page and found a section titled Future, written in careful block letters, and beneath it was a simple sentence that stopped me completely. I want my mother to rest before she gets too old to enjoy her life. I stared at those words for several seconds. Not a luxury car, not a large house, not fame, not wealth. Her biggest dream was giving her mother the chance to stop working. The afternoon sunlight illuminated the page while dust particles drifted through the air around me. And for a moment, the entire hallway seemed strangely quiet. I continued reading. There were practice essays, business ideas, academic achievements she had never mentioned, grades that placed her near the top of her class, recommendations from teachers, volunteer projects, and detailed plans reaching years into the future. The deeper I looked, the more unbelievable it became that nobody had recognized her potential. She had built an entire future inside this notebook while carrying responsibilities most adults struggled to handle. Then I heard footsteps approaching. Sophie appeared at the next morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, casting golden light across the polished floors, and I found myself quietly observing the staff moving about, the soft clatter of dishes, the gentle murmur of morning conversations, and Sophie Carter appeared from the kitchen, her small frame carrying a tray of breakfast with remarkable balance and care, and I noticed a slight limp in her step that seemed new, a subtle stiffness in her gait that drew my attention immediately. She moved with precision, carefully avoiding spills, her expression calm yet alert, eyes flicking briefly toward the grand hall where I was standing, as if making sure nothing required urgent attention from her before she continued her task. I took a cautious step forward, wanting to approach without startling her, and when she noticed me, she paused, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, her hands adjusting the tray, her posture straightening slightly, a silent acknowledgement of my presence. The morning air carried the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee, a comforting contrast to the tension that lingered in her movements, and I realized she had been walking this fine line of responsibilities for years, carrying more than anyone in this house seemed to recognize, the weight of her household duties blending seamlessly with the burden of her schoolwork and the quiet care for her mother, all of it shaping the determined yet gentle expression on her face. I greeted her softly, and she responded with a tentative smile, her eyes bright despite the morning strain, revealing an inner strength that was quietly extraordinary. And as I observed her pour juice into glasses, neatly aligning each on the tray, I noted how methodical she was, every action intentional, measured, a rhythm perfected over countless mornings. A sudden thought struck me, how remarkable it was that this young woman, barely 20, managed such precision, such responsibility, without complaint, and yet here she was, carrying a physical reminder of some past mishap, a limp that did not diminish her efficiency or her composure. I asked gently if she had injured herself recently, and she paused, glancing down at her feet before shaking her head with a small sigh. A mixture of acknowledgement and discretion, the type that made you respect both her strength and her humility. The room seemed to slow, each sound heightened. The faint scrape of shoes on the floor, the clink of the tray, and I understood more deeply the resilience that defined her, the quiet dignity, the thoughtfulness in every decision she made. And as she continued her tasks, carefully distributing breakfast to the waiting staff and guests, I realized that witnessing such determination and grace was a rare privilege, a moment that revealed not just the efficiency of her movements but the steadfastness of her spirit, the careful attention to others even while managing her own pain, an illustration of character and courage in a young woman who, despite her limp, carried the entire household forward with unwavering strength. As the afternoon sun cast warm light across the garden, the young woman carefully tended to the flowers, her movements deliberate yet graceful, each step measured to accommodate the subtle limp that still marked her stride, a gentle reminder of resilience and careful perseverance. She paused briefly, adjusting the watering can, her eyes scanning the rows of vibrant blossoms with a mix of concentration and quiet satisfaction. Noticing how each petal reflected light differently, the shades of pink, lavender, and white creating a calming palette, and she allowed herself a small smile at the beauty she had nurtured, her fingers brushing softly against the leaves as she ensured none were neglected. Nearby, the mansion's grand doors opened, and the Mafia boss stepped into the garden, his presence commanding yet calm, observing her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, noting how naturally she carried herself despite her minor impediment, the sunlight catching the subtle highlights in her hair, and he approached with careful steps, ensuring not to startle her, his expression softening as he spoke, acknowledging the care she had put into this peaceful afternoon scene, a rare glimpse of tranquility amidst their otherwise complex lives. She looked up, her eyes meeting his, a silent understanding passing between them, the kind of quiet communication that needed no words, and for a moment, the world outside the garden seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them, connected through shared experiences and subtle gestures, her gentle smile returning as she tilted her head slightly, showing both respect and a hint of warmth, while he, in turn, recognized the strength and determination that had carried her through countless challenges, appreciating the delicate balance she maintained between diligence and grace. Together they walked slowly along the garden path, each step thoughtful, her limp managed with steady confidence. Their conversation minimal but meaningful, discussing the care of the plants and the changes in the seasons, laughter occasionally breaking through, light and genuine, echoing softly against the stone walls of the mansion, creating an atmosphere of camaraderie and quiet joy. A moment of respite that felt both grounding and extraordinary, a testament to their mutual respect and growing bond. And as they reached the end of the path, the young woman paused to adjust a particularly stubborn vine, while he watched attentively, offering subtle guidance when needed, their interaction seamless and natural, a display of trust and understanding that spoke volumes about their relationship. The afternoon waned, shadows lengthening, and as they prepared to leave the garden, the sense of calm lingered, a shared serenity that contrasted sharply with the complexities of their usual world, leaving both with a quiet appreciation for these moments of connection, the young woman's perseverance and grace shining brightly, and the Mafia boss's attentive, respectful presence highlighting the growing depth of their bond. The garden a silent witness to the strength, trust, and subtle affection that defined their partnership, a delicate balance of care, attention, and mutual respect that promised more meaningful interactions in the days to come. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the quiet streets, and she hurried along the sidewalk, careful to keep her limp hidden, yet moving with a determination that mirrored the growing tension in her chest. Her eyes darted toward the tall, elegant building ahead, its windows reflecting the fading light and hinting at the presence of someone waiting. A figure whose attention had been drawn by a text she never intended to send, yet whose anticipation now hummed in the air, palpable and immediate. As she approached the entrance, the Mafia boss appeared from a side doorway, his expression unreadable but his eyes focused intently on her, assessing every movement with a practiced precision. Yet there was a softness in his gaze that contrasted sharply with his commanding presence, acknowledging both her courage and the delicate vulnerability she carried, and she felt a mixture of relief and nervousness, her pulse quickening at the proximity and the unspoken understanding between them. He offered a subtle nod, signaling her to follow him into the quieter hallway where the chatter of the city outside faded into muffled echoes, and as they moved together, she sensed the careful balance between their worlds, the normalcy of her everyday life intersecting with the intensity of his calculated realm, each step measured, each glance exchanged carrying meaning beyond words, a silent communication that wove respect, caution, and an emerging trust into the rhythm of their walk. Reaching a small, softly lit lounge, he gestured toward a chair, encouraging her to sit, and she complied, the moment feeling both ordinary and charged with anticipation as the tension of the mistaken message and its consequences lingered in the air. Yet his demeanor was calm, controlled, providing a grounding presence that allowed her to settle, if only briefly, into the space between uncertainty and clarity. Conversation began in careful tones, their voices low and deliberate, exploring the immediate situation with a mix of practical detail and subtle emotional cues, each word chosen to convey reassurance while navigating the delicate circumstances, and she felt a growing sense of alignment, recognizing that despite the accidental intrusion into his world, there was room for understanding and measured reaction, a bridge between the unexpected and the carefully maintained order. As the discussion continued, small gestures, the tilt of a head, a slight smile, the acknowledgement of shared awareness, created a rhythm that was both grounding and quietly intimate, illustrating the complex interplay of respect, curiosity, and emerging connection. And when they finally rose to leave, the outside world seemed sharper, more immediate, yet somehow tempered by the subtle bond formed in those few minutes. The mistaken text now a catalyst for a deeper recognition of courage, attention, and unspoken alliance, leaving both with a sense of potential that extended beyond the immediate encounter and hinted at a narrative yet to unfold, a dark yet intriguing dance of circumstance, choice, and mutual awareness that defined the delicate balance of their intertwined lives. 1 year later, the mansion looked exactly the same from the outside, yet somehow everything felt different, and as I stood near the front entrance watching the late afternoon sunlight spill across the stone driveway, I found myself remembering the quiet girl who once hid in the kitchen after midnight, carefully wrapping leftovers as if they were something precious. And it was difficult to reconcile that memory with the person who stepped out of the arriving car that afternoon, Sophie Carter. Moved with a confidence that had not existed a year earlier, her posture straight, her smile calm, her eyes bright with purpose. And for a moment, even the staff members gathering near the entrance seemed unsure whether they were looking at the same young woman they once barely noticed. She carried herself differently now, not because success had changed her character, but because opportunity had finally allowed her true character to become visible. The warm breeze lifted a few strands of her hair as she walked toward the house, and I noticed that the nervous habit of looking down while speaking had disappeared, replaced by a quiet certainty that came from earning every achievement through discipline and hard work. Several staff members greeted her with genuine enthusiasm, and Sophie stopped to speak with each of them individually, remembering names, asking questions, listening carefully, treating every person with the same respect she always had. And that simple detail told me more about her success than any diploma or award ever could. Inside the mansion, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the familiar hallways where she had spent so many years helping her mother. And as she walked through those rooms, memories seemed to linger in every corner. Yet there was no bitterness in her expression, only gratitude. Eventually we reached the library, a quiet room filled with leather-bound books and golden afternoon light. And for several moments neither of us spoke. Sophie simply looked around, absorbing the familiar surroundings before reaching into her bag and removing a large envelope. She placed it carefully on the desk in front of me and smiled. I opened it slowly and discovered copies of academic awards, internship offers, recommendation letters, and a formal acceptance into one of the most respected graduate programs in the country. Each page reflected years of effort, sacrifice, and determination. I looked up at her, genuinely impressed, but Sophie only laughed softly and shook her head. She explained that none of those documents were the real reason she came back. Then she handed me a second envelope, much smaller than the first. Inside was a handwritten letter. The paper trembled slightly in my hands as I read. She wrote about her mother, about the nights they worried about bills, about the embarrassment she once felt carrying leftovers home, and about the moment someone finally looked at her and saw potential instead of circumstance. Every sentence was simple, honest, and deeply personal. When I finished reading, the room remained silent for several seconds. Outside, the fading sunlight painted long shadows across the garden, and I realized that the greatest accomplishment sitting in front of me was not her academic success or professional future. It was the fact that she had never lost her kindness. As Sophie stood near the window smiling at the life she had built, I understood something important. The remarkable part was never that her future changed. The remarkable part was that success had revealed who she had been all along. The evening settled gently over the mansion, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep blue. And as I stood near the terrace overlooking the gardens, I watched the staff move through their routines with a sense of calm that had not existed here a year earlier. Laughter drifted from the kitchen, conversations felt lighter, and there was a warmth in the house that no amount of money could have purchased. Sophie stood nearby speaking with her mother, and the sight alone felt like the answer to a question I had not realized I was asking all those years. Her mother looked healthier now, her shoulders no longer carrying the exhaustion that once seemed permanent, and Sophie smiled as she listened, the kind of smile that came from peace rather than relief. For a long time, I believed influence was measured by control, by the ability to change outcomes with a decision. But standing there, I understood that real change often begins with something much smaller, something as simple as paying attention. I remembered the night I found her alone in the kitchen, trying not to be seen, carefully preserving what others ignored, and it seemed impossible that such a quiet moment had eventually transformed so many lives. The remarkable thing was not that Sophie achieved success. The remarkable thing was how many people changed because of her presence. The staff treated one another differently now, with more patience, more respect, more awareness. People who once walked past each other without a second glance now stopped to ask questions, to listen, to help when help was needed. The culture of the house had shifted in ways no formal rule ever could have accomplished. Later that evening, everyone gathered for a small celebration in the dining room, not because of an award or accomplishment, but simply because Sophie was home again. The long table glowed beneath warm light. Conversations flowed easily, and for the first time, there was no visible divide between those who managed the house and those who worked inside it. Everyone shared the same space, the same meal, the same laughter. As I looked around the room, I realized that the empty chair I once offered had become something much larger than a seat at a table. It had become a symbol of belonging. Sophie eventually stood and thanked everyone for their kindness, but she spent more time thanking others than talking about herself, and that did not surprise me at all. Humility had always been one of her greatest strengths. When the evening ended and the guests slowly drifted away, I stepped outside onto the terrace once more. The garden lights glowed softly below, illuminating the paths we had once walked together while discussing flowers, dreams, and possibilities. A cool breeze moved through the trees, carrying the familiar scent of roses across the property, and for a few quiet moments I simply stood there reflecting on everything that had happened. Sophie joined me a few minutes later and handed me one final note before leaving for the night. It contained only a single sentence written in her careful handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me before the world did." I read it twice before folding the paper and placing it in my pocket. Then I looked out across the estate one last time and smiled, because the truth was simple. I had thought I was changing the future of a young woman who deserved a chance. Instead, she changed an entire house, reminded people of their humanity, restored dignity where it had been forgotten, and taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is notice someone everyone else overlooks. And as the lights of the mansion glowed against the night sky, I understood that kindness leaves a legacy far greater than power ever will.